Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to leave a few minutes before getting started just to allow people to come into the room, as it were.
I like it that when you record something, it comes up on the computer saying this meeting is being recorded. That's what happens if you're in prison in the United States and somebody calls you on the phone.
Yeah.
They have to announce that any conversation you have as a prisoner with somebody in the outside world is being recorded. It's very polite.
Very
I think
nice. Yeah.
quite a lot of us will have been in Zoom or Microsoft Teams meetings recently that feel like a form of incarceration. So it's
Yeah,
it's an
definitely.
appropriate metaphor.
It's house arrest.
Okay, folks, I think we'll maybe make a start there, and other folks can kind of join us as and when. Thank you very much for joining us tonight at the 2021 Folk Film Gathering. I'm Jamie Chambers, I'm the director of the festival. It is my great honour tonight to be able to bring together two of my absolute favourite filmmakers, John Sayles and Kleber Mendonça Filho. I'm a filmmaker myself, and when I started making films, it was John's films in some ways that kind of really gave me the kind of spark to pick up a camera, which is not to hold John responsible for anything I did after that. But I really had a sense when kind of watching films like Matewan or Rowan Inish, which is playing in our program this year, of a sense of my sense of cinema being expanded, like I was watching a film that was kind of expanding what I thought cinema could do. And, a decade or so later, I was lucky enough to catch Kleber's films, Neighbouring Sounds, in the Edinburgh Film House. And I had that same sense of a film that was really expanding my sense of what cinema could do. So it's a great honor for us to have John and Kleber with us tonight, and also to have my friend and colleague Johnny Murray hosting the session tonight. Please do check out, folks, the rest of our program. We are John's film The Secret of Rowan Inish is playing in our program. It's streaming all week, as is Kleber's film Aquarius, and a kind of collection of other rare cinema from around the world, from the Canadian Arctic to Ireland and beyond. This is one of a series of events that we are hosting at the Folk Film Gathering, where we are inviting directors from different parts of the world and kind of coming from different experiences, but whom we hope might have something to share in common, as we will hopefully find out tonight. So yes, thank you so much, John and Kleber, for being with us. And I'm going to pass over to my friend Johnny, who is our host for the night.
Thanks very much, Jamie, and thanks to folk for joining us tonight. And just to say, if you have any questions for our distinguished guests, pop them in the chat bar. So we're going to talk, I'm going to say as little and as infrequently as I possibly can. But if you want to post questions, we'll then come back to those towards the last third of the conversation tonight. Kleber, John, can I begin? I don't know whether the first question is a subconscious rebellion against us all being, as we were just saying, incarcerated in our living rooms and bedrooms. But watching Aquarius and Secret of Rowan Inish again this week, and some of your other works, one of the things that really strikes me, I think, perhaps that both of you share, is a really urgent concern to interrogate, explore, and immerse both yourselves and us as your audience in place, in location. And your location is not a neutral backdrop or a necessary evil that for the stories that you tell. And I wonder whether you could begin by saying how you approach the idea of making films as an exploration and an immersion in particular places in which those films are set.
Yeah, I'll start. One of the things that I find is, because I write my own movies, very often the place that they happened is a place that I'm fascinated with. I haven't necessarily lived there. I want to know more about it. And so very often I will go to the place while I'm still thinking about writing the script. Talk to people, get a physical feel for it, what might be an interesting location to shoot in, just because geographic location to shoot in, but also get a feel for the culture. Each place, a lot of things are homogenized now, but there are still a lot of places that have their own personality. So in the case of Passion Fish, the Cajun part of Louisiana has its own kind of history and culture and food and vibe. Alaska, I think we're one of the few features that takes place in Alaska that wasn't shot in Canada. We went to Alaska, we went to Juneau, and we got the vibe there, and we actually ended up casting a lot of local people. Our movie Mate One we made in West Virginia, and there's probably 12 to 15 speaking parts who are, I call them new actors, not non-actors, but people who were West Virginians, and they knew what the story was about. They, in some cases, were related to people who were in the story a couple generations earlier, and they had the accent. And it was cheaper to hire them than to fly somebody in to learn the accent and do it. So for me, it's a source of inspiration, but also, a lot of why I make movies is here's something that I'm trying to figure out that I'm interested in, and I want to know more about it. And getting to make that movie is one of the best ways to know more about it, is to meet those people. And very often we'll come back once I've written the screenplay and just put it in front of local people, have 4 or 5 local people. And we get, mostly it's practical things like, oh, you can't catch catfish in that month right here, you could catch something else, or that's, we'd never trust this guy with a purse seiner. We trust him with a gill net or two, though, because that only takes 2 people to run it, and it's hard to fuck that particular job up. But those are valuable, once again, and it's part of the understanding of the work and the life of the people who live there.
Kleber, anything you would want to add here? I'm struck when I watch movies like Aquarius or Neighbouring Sounds, and they begin with photographic montages. One of the things I really like is this idea that communities are constantly exploring place, and you as a filmmaker then almost become the latest participant in that ongoing process.
Yeah, I mean, your question makes me remember these articles I keep reading now about the new technology that they're using in The Mandalorian. It's this really high-tech backdrop, which they can add anything they want behind the actors, and it's just some kind of a new development in what used to be the green screen. So now it's like a huge LCD or LED screen behind the actors. So my films are probably the furthest away from that kind of technology so far. And it's great to listen to John giving his own side of the story, because in my case, I am Brazilian. Brazil is a huge country, and throughout my life, I grew up watching images not only from Hollywood films, but also from Brazilian television, which is produced in the Southeast. I come from the Northeast, which is about 1,500 miles or 2,000 miles up north. So I grew up watching, not seeing images from Recife, from my own city, except of course in the local news programs with a guy holding a microphone or a woman. So I think as soon as I began making my films, even the short films, I just wanted to shoot the city. Not that I wanted to do postcards, but just to set stories and set the story in the city, which I know very well. And Neighboring Sounds and Aquarius are very, I just made sure that you would see the city. The locations are all real. In Neighboring Sounds, when you see one of the security men using a payphone, that payphone is actually 50 meters from where I used to live at the time. One of the locations in the film with the character Bea, played by Maya Jenkins. Her location is what used to be my own apartment. So the challenge, I think, is how do you shoot a kitchen? So I have Kodak film and Techniscope 239 cinema format. I'll just try to make that kitchen interesting, and I'll shoot on the street where I used to live, and I'll shoot the buildings and the architecture, which I happen to find incredibly ugly, and also very tense and interesting, because it always poses problems for the characters. And then the same thing with Aquarius. So I basically made sure that each and every shot was full of a sense of place. And I have not so far done any films using a studio. Everything I have shot so far is location based, and places I have an emotional attachment with or to them.
Thank you. I want to come back to ask John in a moment about the experience of shooting a place that's previously unknown to you as a filmmaker. But Kleber, can I just stay with what you were saying for a moment first, and just to ask you, does a place that on one level is intimately known to you become unknown or strange once you turn a camera on it? Do you find yourself almost like a first-time visitor or a stranger within a location and a culture that you previously felt you knew intimately well?
That's a great question, because of course, stuff happens once you look through the viewfinder. But I have to say that in particularly with the short films and Aquarius and Neighboring Sounds, I felt like I was walking inside my memories of that place, of those places. And that, of course, is a very interesting feeling. Aquarius begins with a 15-minute segment, which takes place in 1980. So we had a budget, and we basically shot a period sequence. And I felt like I was back in 1980 when I was 12 years old. And it was a very, it was probably the closest I will ever get to traveling in time, time travel. But that's one way of making films. I mean, the other way, for example, in Bacurau, I shot in places I had never been to, and they became something incredibly strong emotionally for me, because I knew the story of the history of that place. And then I added the history of that place with what we developed as a fiction, as a piece of fiction. So I think I'm opening up to discovering new places, and looking back on the films that John has made, it is quite amazing to imagine the experiences he must have had making all these films, and trying to think about the geography of these films. It's actually fascinating, and I want a piece of that.
Yeah, I working in the Philippines, I had cousins who grew up in the Philippines, so I unlike most Americans, knew something about it. I had just written a novel where about a third of it took place in the Philippines during the Philippine-American War, so I kind of knew it in an abstract research kind of way. We had a friend, Joel Torre, who was a very kind of beloved actor there. And so when we scouted for my movie Amigo, he was kind of our guide to, and we ended up not shooting near Manila. We shot on a totally different island. The Philippines is hundreds and hundreds of islands. We shot on the island of Bohol, so we had to do a little scouting on a couple different islands to find the perfect place. And for me, the richness of it was, first of all, I met a totally different film culture. They make a lot of movies in the Philippines, but they have their own style of making them. And we kind of met them halfway, which was, I think the cast and crew were very happy about, because we paid them maybe a tiny bit more than they usually got paid, but they weren't on for 24-hour days with no overtime. And they got to go home at night. And because we were shooting on location, they got to go and stay in a hotel at night and party together. And so it was like a reunion for a lot of our actors who had worked together in theater or movies over the years. And they had like 6 weeks to hang out together and be in something that they thought was going to be very good. I worked with a totally Filipino crew. They told us, we don't really shoot sync sound here, kind of like Italy 10 years earlier, 15 years earlier. So we brought our sound people, one of whom was Chilean. And the sound people said, well, we have a sound cart that we have to wheel around and it's going to be real expensive to ship. And the Filipinos say, oh, we can make one of those, send us a picture. And that was my introduction to just how good these Filipino crews were, how inventive they were, how they could do things without the equipment that, in America, you'd assume you would have. Just wonderful people, got a terrific cinematographer. And you could tell that she was kind of like the den mother for all of her crew. She helped them with their taxes and not to lose any of their money, and kind of helped them with their lives as well as their working, because the crews tend to be very, very working class, not people who have further education. And then even though it was set in 1898 and we were basically building a village from that period where there was a village kind of just off camera, we had to have rice paddies. And we had to talk to the rice farmers. And we learned this incredibly complicated, going back centuries, rules about who was renting whose rice field and who owned whose rice field. There were like 25 people we had to talk to get them all to grow rice at the same time, so we'd actually get a crop when we needed it. And we basically bought the whole crop. And then said, okay, any rice, because there's one scene where there's some, a rice paddy burnt, any rice that we don't burn, you get to sell as well as, so it was a good deal for them. And many of them became extras, and, we only had to ask the concession that they turn their karaoke machines off while we were shooting, and relocate their fighting roosters, because that's a huge sport there, so that they wouldn't make noise all during the shooting. And so we moved them a couple miles away and built them a little rooster condominium. But that insight into the community not only helped me as a total foreigner, but my actors who were from Manila, and most of them had grown up in Manila, they got to feel like, oh, I'm playing somebody from a small village. I'm living in it, and they would go and start hanging out with the people who lived in that village. So it really helped without me really changing much. I maybe changed 3 or 4 lines and some physical things that we did. And we found, a kid who could climb my audition for one kid is, see that coconut tree, climb it. And he climbed the tree and he got the part. Another kid, it was, are you afraid of carabao? These big, he says, no, I've ridden on one. I said, okay, well, your character has to, plow a field with a carabao. And he said, yeah, I can do that. So that for me just kind of cements the movie in the place, and I learn a lot that gets into the movie, whether it's changing lines or not.
John, can I ask John a question?
Of course.
The Philippines has a long history of big Hollywood films coming to the Philippines because of Vietnam, and I think Apocalypse Now was shot in the Philippines. Platoon, maybe.
Platoon, yeah.
And so many others. Did you find that local crews had been somehow trained or maybe put into some kind of a mindset, which I do not think would be the project that you shot in the Philippines would not be the same vibe as the project that you shot in the, was that a problem? Was it a
no, actually, what I think that had skipped a generation, because there had been some guerrilla activity in Mindanao and the insurance companies wouldn't insure big American companies to shoot there for 10 or 15 years, and we kind of ignored that, and it was totally safe. So our makeup woman had worked on Platoon, and I think our production designer had worked on Apocalypse Now many, many years earlier. And they thought it was kind of funny how much money was wasted on those big Hollywood things. More people had worked for Roger Corman, like I had, who made very, very low budget exploitation movies there, and made them there because they made them Filipino style, not American style. So, actors I know who worked on those Roger Corman mostly women in prison movies, said they would ask somebody in production, so why do the stuntmen keep getting hurt? I keep seeing these people falling off buildings and being taken away on stretchers. And they said, they're not stunt people. They're just local people who wanted to make $20. And they said, I'll fall off the roof, and then they would break something, and you hope that it didn't cost them more than $20 to get it fixed. So yeah, that can happen. People can get spoiled by the size and the waste of money. We have not had that experience either in Ireland, the Philippines, or in Mexico, where I've worked 4 or 5 times. So I've been very lucky in that way, that there hasn't been that kind of scorched earth thing. What there was a very, very tough local system, and we were actually a lot more reasonable than that local system, where their standard contract for the crew was 24 hours, no overtime, and then an unpaid day off, and then 24 hours, and then an unpaid day off. So working for us was like a working vacation for a lot of the people. And, they were just more rested and less likely to have accidents and things like that. But it can happen.
One thing I feel I'm hearing from you both is about the importance and intensity of this really open-minded, open-hearted, open-eyed approach to the locations and the places in which you make films, and which you make films about. And I wonder whether for you both as filmmakers, is it important to try and engage and encourage an audience to interact with those places in a similar way? And if so, how do you go about trying to take an audience there, whether that's in the script or in the edit suite or whatever?
Yeah. For me, the first thing is that I'm not interested in what's exotic. When I look at a place that I know nothing about, I don't want to know what's exotic about it. I want to start with basic human emotions and work out. So that if I write a script about that place, I want people from there to recognize those people, and not just the outer trappings, which might be for tourism and not really something they're into it anymore. And part of that is that some of my favorite films growing up were films like I felt like, well, I got to go someplace that I didn't have a passport until I was 35 years old. I got to go to Italy, I got to go to Japan, and see some little bit. And and some of them were contemporary films, some were historical films, but I felt I got a little window and met some people that I wouldn't ordinarily meet. So when I go to a culture, and it may be within the United States, I want to spend enough porch time to understand it enough that I feel like I'm on solid ground when I start to write about it. And some of that, and this goes to Kleber's kind of movies, is understanding the class consciousness and class system of the place. Americans don't like to think of themselves of having class distinctions, and certainly compared to Britain, they may be blurrier, and they are often, but not always, based on race in this country. So you really have to tune in to know what those, class distinctions might be. Are they education? Are they wealth? Are they, just kind of history? Somebody might not have money, but have a name that carries some weight or whatever. And all that stuff is fascinating to me. And so you have to learn some, not just book history, but local history. and just watching people interact. In the American South, you know, I made a movie that's set in 1950 in Alabama. You know, and the heaviest scene in the movie for me, because I remember this from when I was a kid, there's this young guy, and he's an African American kid, and he's walking down the road, and the local policeman stops him and says, "Take your hat off." And the kid doesn't understand. Oh, I'm in the South. Black men, no matter what their age, take their hat off to a white person they're speaking to, no matter what their age. You know, that's something you have to kind of know about that place, and the actors have to know if they're not from there, which that particular actor, what, you know, he was from Austin, Texas, and had lived a, you know, a fairly sheltered life in some ways.
Kleber, are some of these ideas important for you? I'm thinking here of that moment in Aquarius where characters are on a beach and they cross, I think it's an overflow from a sewage pipe, and you know, one says to the other, "You've actually crossed the boundary here, and you're not from this place, so this isn't going to be a really obvious marker to you, but this is something really important."
Well, that's something that I learned from being from living very close to that beach, and from going to the beach, you know, as a child and as a teenager. But I have to say, I mean, it's very special that that I'm actually having this conversation here tonight, because back in 1996, I saw Lone Star, and I saw it on VHS. It had the letterboxed. So Lone Star was a film that really opened my eyes. And I can even, I mean, I love the whole film, but the one scene that really taught me about a lot of the things that I was already observing in terms of Brazilian society, and, you know, and the tensions and the class divisions, is the scene where they are talking. I think he went over to Mexico, and he draws a line on the ground. He draws a line on the ground, and then it just suddenly became very clear that the whole film was about divisions and borders and racial separation, and that is something that that is basically in all my films. I keep going back to that. I wouldn't say that it's because of John and Lone Star. It's because that's how Brazil works, and the divisions in Brazil are so cruel. And Brazil is an incredibly and very peculiarly racist society. And often people say that Brazil is a racial paradise, which it is not. And a lot of what I have done is mostly framing people in ideas of separation and dividing lines and physical division. And I think that's life in not only Brazil, of course, life in society as a whole. So yeah, the scene with the sewer on the beach is just one example, and there are many examples in my three features and also the short films. But of course, I mean, it keeps coming back, and I hope it's in those films as just part of life. It's not some heavy political statement. It's just a way of framing the stories, and because that's how Brazil works.
Just maybe moving on now from the idea of place as something physical, something else, and please stop me, cut me off at the knees if I'm imposing things on your films that you wouldn't see or wouldn't wish to be imposed on them. But watching your work together, or section over the last week, one of the really powerful affinities that came through for me as a viewer is, it seems to me that you both approach place as something that's not just physical, but it's defined by people. It's not where you live, it's who you live with. And there's a real kind of multivocal, quite choral approach to these films as experiences. And I wonder if you would both be willing to say something about that idea of writing a film that, to me as a viewer anyway, they very often feel collectively owned by the protagonists, rather than having a clear or conventionally defined lead protagonist.
Yeah, one of the things that jumped out at me right away in Neighboring Sounds is that for somebody's first movie, willing to have a movie that seems amorphous at first. There are a lot of little subplots, but it's really okay. I'm dropping the needle in these various parts in this neighborhood, and parts of the neighborhood are gated. Those people hit the street to do their business, but then they go back to this fortress that they've made in their house. And yes, there is a history, and we get it in little bits and pieces to this place, but some of the people who live here have no idea what the history was. Some of them are very new or have chosen to be ignorant of what that history is. And then it kind of all kind of gathers at the end. That is a big risk in a movie. Moviegoers are used to much more being taken by the hand and told, okay, here's the plot coming, and here's, now you're going to see what happens next, and here's what happens next. And it's all leading to something. Believe me, it's all leading to something. And when they don't get that right away, they can get confused and bored very easily. So a couple of my films, Sunshine State and Lone Star are good examples, have two protagonists. And in Lone Star, the protagonists never meet. Chris Cooper's character never meets Joe Morton's character, but there's a plot, and their experiences have something to do with each other because they're about that place and about race and borders. In Sunshine State, Angela Bassett and Edie Falco's characters are on screen for 10 seconds in a restaurant, and they cross. And shooting them, I had Edie for 3 weeks, and then I had Angela for 3 weeks, and I had them both for one day. And that's a very unusual, usually if you're cross-cutting between people, they're going to come together and have a big confrontation or something. And some of that is about, if you're making a story that's about a bunch of people, and it's not, they're all trapped in a mine together, and you really want to know who those people are, you're asking the audience to join and see the world through a bunch of people's eyes. And you're not necessarily told right away who the hero or who the bad guy is. And there may not be a hero or a bad guy. And that's a very unusual form of filmmaking. And there are other people who do it besides me and Kleber, and it's not every one of my movies, but it's a different way of making movies, and it has to be a little more amorphous and a little more organic because of that. You do feel like you've spent time in the neighborhood after you've seen the movie, rather than, oh well, that was the backdrop they put to the detective story or whatever the genre was.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by, I'm also a film programmer, so I've been programming films for 23 years now, and I have learned a lot from looking at audiences watching films, and I'm always fascinated by how people have been taught to react to films. People have many expectations about films. They go into an auditorium, a cinema, and they have their own set of expectations, and a lot of those expectations, they come from the industry because they have been shown, they have seen many films, and films operate a certain way depending on how your diet goes. If you have a more diverse diet, you are more likely to open up in terms of what you can expect from a film. So I think, for example, in in Neighboring Sounds, I think people have, I mean, of course, you get the people who get the film, and then you have the other people who don't get the film. And I was always surprised to see how some members of the audience, they just couldn't understand things that I call the logic of life. For example, there is a couple in the film, Neighboring Sounds, and at some point they break up, but you don't see you don't see them breaking up. But that's what I call the logic of life, because sometimes you meet a friend and you say, how's Maria? And then he will say, well, we broke up, I'm devastated. And that's life, and they broke up. That's the logic of life. So I find it strange that people don't accept the fact that she's gone. You know, she's not in the film anymore because they broke up and you didn't see it. So that's one thing. The other thing that I could maybe reference Bacurau, my last film. Bacurau plays with a lot of expectations from the industry and from Brazilian society in terms of people from the Northeast, I'm one of them, and people who live in the outback in the Northeast. And so they're supposed to be simple-minded, uneducated, ignorant, and uninteresting. And when I got together with Juliano to make the film, my good friend Juliano Dornelles, we wrote and directed the film together. We thought that they should be amazing people. They should be just great. They should deny everything that people normally expect. And in Brazil, and I think it also works in countries, in other countries, but it was a very strong reaction in Brazil, because people were delighted and surprised that the community, they are wonderful, and that's the biggest kick I get out of that film.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it that it's a very kind of poor village. It's very isolated. It's isolated enough that the government has decided to erase it from Google and stuff like that, erase it from history. But everybody's got all the modern stuff. They've got cell phones. They don't have to make smoke signals anymore. They just get on their cell phone and say, some strangers are coming into town. They watch television. They go on the Ethernet and they can, download anything they want. And they have somehow done all that without losing some of their really basic stuff. There's some glue there. That guy who's the teacher, who's taught a couple generations of kids. He's some glue, and everybody knows that. There's that doctor who, the shocking thing for me at the beginning of that film is, why doesn't anybody tell her to shut up? And they do, but they kind of do it in a very tolerant way of, oh, the doctor's drunk again. And we all know she loved that woman. And so even though she's calling her a puta and all this other kind of stuff, it's like, well, of course she's upset. This woman that she really loved has died and she can't deal with it, today. And tomorrow I need to go and have her check my athlete's foot or whatever. And that was what struck me the most about it, was that because of their isolation, this is a place where even if people aren't friendly, they know each other's business. And there's a kind of collective memory there that goes back several generations. There aren't too many new people there. The thing with the first two motorcyclists come through town, and everybody comes out to talk to them because they want to know. Nobody comes through this town on a motorcycle. What's the deal? And they're very friendly, but they're also incredibly cautious, which I run into all the time doing movie scouts when I'm in the, and when we do movie scouts, we leave enough time to actually sit down and talk with people. And we may not, we may know right away we're not going to use that village or that place, but we tell them the plot of the movie and ask them some questions. And very often they say, I know where you should go. It's the perfect place for that story. And they may say those people are assholes, but they're trying to help you out.
I mean, just
Yeah.
what you say there, John, this thing about being prepared to invest time in people without expecting necessarily any automatic or immediate return from it. That strikes me as something that perhaps viewers of both your respective cinemas are encouraged to do. And again, it's back to Kleber's idea of the logic of life. That, you know, things about a person or community are not going to be immediately obvious to you unless you're willing to take time to reflect, watch, to observe, to make connections. And it's not necessarily a film or a filmmaker's job to deliver those things up to you on a plate.
Yeah, some of it depends on how you've set them up. So in Bacurau, it's it's a story about a bunch of things, and that develops over some time, and so you don't know exactly what the deal is at first, and that's okay because it really pays off at the end. In Neighboring Sounds, it's not a movie about that guy and his girlfriend. If it was a romance about that guy and his girlfriend, and then all of a sudden you just see him and he says, "Oh yeah, she left me, I'm desolate," then you would have betrayed the audience because they would have been, but it's just one of many stories that's going on. And he has he's kind of a nice guy, but he's a little deaf to, class, when he deals with his maids and stuff like that. And, and so it is just like life. He's one of the people we know from that milieu. And when we check in on him again, oh, that didn't work out. And he's feeling bad about it. And, but he doesn't know all these others. He's not watching the movie with us. So it is, when you make a movie like this, you are asking people to work a little bit because their usual movie watching instincts aren't going to, they're going to have to pay a little bit more attention. And some people really don't want to pay that much attention. And I usually lose them in the first 10 minutes. You try to kind of give people a hint of what the movie's going to be like in the first 10 minutes, and you're going to lose some people.
Yeah, John, I keep doing something that is quite dangerous, and I know it myself, but I just try to make the script interesting from the word go. In Lone Star, you opened the film with archaeology and the skeleton. So for me, that's wonderful. That's really strong. But in Aquarius, it takes 26 minutes for something to happen, like a plot point.
Yeah.
In Bacurau, it takes 41 minutes, and I'm writing a new script, and the way it's going, it's probably going to be 50 minutes. But I don't know. That's how that's just. I just try to make it interesting all the way to the point when something happens. But it's not that I have problems with readers when they read the script. It's more like when the films come out, you see here and there people saying it takes too long to begin, but once it begins, it's fine. But I really like this really long. Maybe it's not really about liking; it's just the way that I've been writing.
Yeah, but also the actors are interesting, the characters are interesting, and they're kind of like, I want to see what's going to go on with that dog. Is she going to shoot that dog? And the dog becomes, kind of disappears from the plot, and you think she's killed it. She thinks she's killed it. I love the scene where she gets the device that makes the high-pitched sound that only dogs and children can hear. And that shuts the dog up, and the kids can't concentrate on their lesson. But that's not what the movie is about. That's one of the many threads throughout the movie. My very first movie, Return of the Secaucus 7, was about a 3-day weekend from some old friends. And when I said to the actors playing it, I say, 2 or 3 of you are going to have a big drama this weekend. Next year, when you get together, 3 totally different of you will have the big drama, and the others will say, well, that was the year those people had a big drama. But you are the star of this movie. This movie is about you, and you have to play the character that way. So what do you care about? Do you know, if you're the hostess, maybe you care about everybody getting along. If you're somebody else, you care about, I've got my job and I should be working this weekend, but I've got all these guests, let's figure that. And I write biographies for all of my characters. So they have more than what's in the script, so that they have that sense. And I, watching Neighboring Sounds, I felt like it could probably take any one of these characters and make a pretty good 85-minute movie, and find a plot that kind of worked for that character, and the other people would become secondary. And finally, nobody is secondary. In fact, the ending is somebody who seems like a very secondary character, and all of a sudden they've got the heaviest, kind of agenda, and have been living their life and having affairs and all this kind of stuff, but they came there for a reason, a kind of heavy revenge reason. And we don't need to see what happens next. We realize, okay, this guy had a movie plot going the whole time, but we only saw him in little snippets.
About this idea of cinema and places, I remember the first time I went to New York City in 1991, I was in a taxi, and I saw one of those Next Exit Secaucus, and for me it was John Sayles. So I have never been to this place, but that place existed in my head because of the film, and this is something that I find fascinating. The building where I shot Aquarius has become a tourist attraction on the beach in Recife. So I find that beautiful in a way, because it used to happen only from, we would only do that with Rio and Sao Paulo and Hollywood and New York City and places like that. So
have people come out looking for Bacurau?
The location is a beautiful location. It's exactly what it is in the film, and it has become a major attraction. They put back the museum, which did not exist. They built it for the film, and Bacurau has become a reference for many things in Brazil right now, particularly with the whole catastrophe that is going on now with the government.
Just what we're talking here about, these ideas of audiences literally journeying to places where you've both made films. Could I ask you to say something about your respective ways of thinking about how you envisage or hope that your films will journey to audiences? Is there an initial or an ideal audience who the films you make are primarily or essentially for, and it's a bonus if it reaches anywhere else? Or are you thinking about the challenges of making a movie that on one level will be seen by people who perhaps have quite detailed knowledge and experience of the cultures within which you're working, but then 3 months later maybe being watched by someone halfway around the globe who can't pick up on some of those finer textural details?
Distribution right now in movie making in America is the biggest bottleneck.
Same thing here.
Distribution. It's so hard to get a movie on the screen in front of people. Pretty much all the movies I've made have, except for maybe 8 Men Out, which was a baseball movie that Orion distributed, have been thought of as art movies. Not that they're that arty. It's just that those are the cinemas that would play them. So when we made a movie in Alabama, the city that we shot in didn't have a movie theater. They made one, luckily, in the year that I was editing and doing all the posts on it. So we were able to show it there when it was done. But it was certainly not a theater that was going to show any of my other movies. There are entire states where there might have been one theater that ever showed one of my movies, because there's just not that many art theaters in those states. So when I make a movie, I have to say, here's this thing. And luckily, unlike filmmakers in the 30s and 40s who thought, I'm going to have a week or two in the movie theaters, and then they're going to throw that movie away and nobody will ever see it. They didn't know television was going to come, or any of the archival, kind of forms that we can watch movies in now. They thought this is like writing for a newspaper. It's going to be lining a birdcage tomorrow. So I just make a movie feeling like, here's something I want to talk about. I want to work with these people. I hope somebody will get to see it. And so far it hasn't been very successful. The last 3 movies I made, I did not get distribution, so I had to use my own money to get it on any screens at all, which gets you maybe an opening in 2 cities. You can track almost all of them down in some form on some platform and download them. Some of them are on DVD, and people catch up to them, and you never know when they catch up to them. But I talked to Jamie about this before, is the people the least likely to see our movies often are the people that it's about. It's either not something that would ever play in their neighborhood, or it's just they're used to watching genre films and that's what they like. And when we played them for the people where we made the film, they've loved it. Partly because they see their friends and neighbors and sometimes themselves in the background in the film, but also because it's their story in some way. But they probably would never have gone to that movie if they didn't know it was shot in their town. It just would seem something like, well, that's another world. That's not the kind of movie I like.
When you work with public funds, as we do in Brazil, there is a question in the forms that you have to fill out, which is hilarious / terrifying, which is, who is your target audience? And we just say everyone, anyone, but they expect some technical, mathematical, statistic bit of information. And it's a question which is impossible to answer, particularly, what John is saying, it also applies to Brazilian filmmaking. We have, of course, the usual Brazilian commercial films, which are comedies normally with television framing. And then we have the Avengers taking 12 screens in a 12-screen multiplex, or 17 screens in an 18-screen multiplex. You can choose between 3D, 2D, dubbed, or subtitled. But it's still the same film. It's the Avengers, and it's difficult. So I just hope the films will be seen, and luckily we have we still have well, now with the pandemic, I don't know which cinemas survived, but with my 3 films, we still managed to get them first and foremost in the indie cinemas, and they did so well that the multiplexes began to invite them, and they did very well. Bacurau did incredibly well, actually. Bacurau was a strange case because they actually pushed a Hollywood film from the big IMAX screens. Bacurau is not an IMAX film.
Yeah.
But they wanted to show it on the biggest screen possible with the 2 projectors. So they pushed the Hollywood film away and they programmed Bacurau, to my surprise. So those little things make you, happy.
Yeah, I think I got spoiled by, I'm a novelist as well, and I had written, novels and short stories before I started working for the movies. And when you write a novel and it gets published, it's this thing that exists, and it feels like it doesn't have one weekend, and it's either a success or a failure, which is kind of the way that the movie business thinks of movies. So it's always there. And it got in some libraries, and I run into people who say, "Oh, I read your novel." And I say, "Which one?" And it's one that I wrote, 40 years ago, which is a nice thing. So yeah, you, you know, you never know when. I had a friend who her father was going deaf very rapidly. And whenever I met him, we would talk about foreign films because this is before there was closed captioning for English language stuff. So he only watched foreign films that were subtitled.
Mhm.
And he never would have otherwise. And he just loved these movies. He said there was a doctor, they took him to all kinds of places. And he really, really concentrated and noticed the cinematography and the movement, because when you're starting to lose your hearing, some of the visual cues get more important to you. Who knows, that you make a movie in Brazil and somebody in St. Louis, Missouri is going to find it because they're just looking for anything that's subtitled. And for me, whether it's a book or a movie, it's just a thing. But when somebody's reading it or watching it, it comes alive.
Yeah, I'm a little old-fashioned with the movie going experience, because I think today, especially with the pandemic, I find that people are having access to films in different ways in a computer like this, or maybe even with a cell phone. But what I've been able to do with my 3 films so far is I managed to get the pleasure out of the release, the theatrical release. And they had different scales to their release. And Neighboring Sounds was a very small release, but it did very well for a small release. And Bacurau had a much bigger release. But now, if you make a film for Netflix or Amazon, you probably get the satisfaction, but not the pleasure. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So now that my films are just out in pirate versions and Blu-ray, DVD, Netflix, and different ways, and Mubi, of course. I know people are watching them, but I don't get the energy that you get from a proper theatrical release. But in a way, it's still a good thing, but it's just a different experience, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, the big difference is, people do, if they like a movie or they like a TV series or a movie made for TV, they will talk about it. But if you see it in a theater, it's something that you shared with strangers.
Yes.
And if you see it on your own screen and then you talk about it, it's something you share with friends, either to recommend or talk about it because you both saw it. But you didn't have that experience together. And there's there's still this great thing of going to a movie with a bunch of people you don't know, and the movie really clicks. It really works with and you as an audience become a community who can only hear each other.
Yes.
You hope can only hear each other. And nobody's looking at their cell phone while they're watching the movie. But that's a very unique experience that I really miss.
John and Johnny, do you read Letterboxd?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah,
I don't.
it's a very strange and interesting, fluent. It's just a flow of reactions to all kinds of cinema, and each film has its own endless list of reactions, and some are proper reviews, some are just a one line horrible cursing, or maybe just a one line poetry. It's a beautiful experience, actually. And yeah, that's one way of the new cinephilia, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of like sitting in the bathroom stall during one of your movies playing and hearing what people say about it when they come in to take a leak.
That's a great image.
That idea that one thing arguably that makes a community is that people transmit and share stories and memories in quite intimate, direct ways, feels like it comes up in both of your films a lot. I mean, sometimes in quite literal form. I love the way in something like Rowan Inish, for example, it's almost like we say, okay, let's hand over to another character who's come in to tell us a story.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe
I love that film.
Yeah, some of what that movie is about storytelling, and so there are 3 or 4 stories just told in it, and each is handled in a different way. So sometimes you have the image and the voice narration still going over it. Sometimes the voice disappears and there's just image telling the story, and then the voice comes back. Sometimes it's just the person, telling it. And one of my ideas for it was, it's set on an Irish island before that island has TV or radio. And so even the girl's fantasies are kind of hers. They're
It's
not
1946, isn't it?
Yeah,
1940, yeah.
It's supposed to be just after the war. And so our special effects were kind of the special effects that if she ever saw a movie would have been done back in 1940s or whatever. They're just simple dissolves and those kind of things. Not even the high tech of that moment. But yeah, I mean, storytelling is for a reason. We tell stories for a reason, and there are a bunch of different good reasons to tell stories. Sometimes it's to tell people to watch out for something, so it's cautionary. Sometimes it's to say, this is who we are. And in the case of Lone Star, very much it's a movie about, well, what about our legends? Are they good for us? They are how we like to think of ourselves, but maybe we have to take them out every once in a while and look at them and say, okay, the Alamo, a bunch of people who were fighting because they weren't allowed to have slaves, and that was the freedom that they were fighting for. Let's examine that legend. And it's really hard for people to examine those legends, because it's when you attack that legend, they feel like you're attacking them and everything they hold, holy and sacred, and their self-image. So stories are really powerful, and when there's a story within a story, there's often, okay, is that even true? Why is this person telling this story now? They're powerful, and I think in a more amorphous form of storytelling, where there's not just one plot with one arc, that's some of the richness of it. Of, well, here's this person, what's their story? And one of the things that I really liked about the Baccarat was that there's this action movie part of it and this revenge part of it. I actually wrote a Dolph Lundgren movie for somebody that has a very similar plot, where the innocent villagers turn out to be pretty heavy, but the characters are fascinating. If the motorcycles never showed up, I would have happily spent 90 to 100 minutes in that village and figured out what's going on here with these people. And that's, that is once again asking something for people. But I think if you do it well, people just want to see that character. What's going to happen with that character? It's probably why they were so upset that the girlfriend disappeared and that they were getting invested in that guy, that relationship. It seemed like it had some promise to it.
Yeah, so, maybe Kleber, I was going to say, for me, I suppose a similar experience would be watching Aquarius, and Aunt Lucia as a character really stayed with me. And I remember my memory is almost of watching the film in real time. I suppose it's the point at which the penny dropped that Aunt Lucia is not necessarily going to come back into the movie. And so in a transactional sense, we did not have to be told the story of our youth, but we're told it because it is a story there to be told. The point, if I'm understanding rightly, of these films is that they're not stories in the singular, they are collections of stories. They're communal experience, and maybe that's what takes us in, I guess, to Jamie programming these movies and appearances by you both as part of a festival that says it's interested in the idea of folk.
Well, what happens when you go to a family gathering? It's not even your family. It's you go with a friend, and then at some point there is a speech in honor of an uncle or an aunt, and you think the speech is so beautiful, but at the same time you realize that the aunt or the uncle, they're bored by the speech. They are not actually interested in the speech. They actually want to say something, and that's the only time you will ever see that person, and you will always remember that person, but he or she will never go back to your life because you just happen to go to that gathering. I think that was, again, the logic of life. She would never come back into the film. In fact, you see a picture of her
Yeah, towards the very
in
end.
the middle of the film as a memory. So yeah, I really like that film. I had a question for John. When you wrote and set out to make Lone Star, did you envision a Western, or is this something that comes from myself looking at an American film with, you know, cowboy hats and guns, and because it feels like a brilliant Western with all the different beats of what Westerns normally are. It's almost like looking at the photo album of the people who made the normal Westerns we're used to.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting because the closest to a Western I've ever made was Matewan. Because Matewan has the structure of a gunfight Western, which are there are these confrontations and they get to be closer and closer to violence. And then there's literally a gunfight at high noon in the middle of the street. That's absolutely structured like a Western. Lone Star is actually structured like a detective movie. With this caveat, which is that the detective, who's this sheriff, whose father was also a sheriff, is asking the literal question, which is what happened on, you know, April 27th, 1956. But he's also asking what kind of human being was my father. So there's this subtext to it, and I absolutely wanted to use the visuals of the Western, so we shot it, you know, in a widescreen format and everything like that. But that it's not about a gunfight at the end. It's about a gunfight that happened a long, long time ago. So it has a little bit more of The Man Who Shot to Liberty Valance, which was going to be a TV movie and has a very kind of square format to it. Than the, you know, the kind of shoot 'em up or gunfight Western. But what I was very aware of is, because of its setting and what people are going to wear, people are going to be carrying all the Westerns they've ever seen to this movie. So some of my work is done for me, and some things are going to be surprising because they're going to expect one thing and they're going to get something else. I had a question for you, which is, did you know Sonia Braga before you started making films?
Personally or artistically?
Just
no, no. I met her 2 months before we shot, and I had the script, and I was talking to my friends and collaborators one Friday evening at home, drinking and eating, and then my DOP, a good friend, Pedro, he said, why don't we go for Sonia Braga? And I thought it was a brilliant idea. It was the most obvious idea, but it hadn't occurred to me. And when she came, I mean, she reacted very strongly to the film, to the script. And when she came on board, I changed the whole idea I had for the film, because I thought the film originally would be a kind of a kitchen sink, almost like a British 60s kitchen sink drama. And then when she came in, I thought, no, this has to be a movie heroine, that face. She's a star. And then I went widescreen, and then I just changed the whole style of the film. It became a very classical kind of style, and I think well,
Because
yeah, it was
it was
a very
I
happy experience.
yeah, I mean, you probably didn't get to shoot in sequence, but talking about the aunt who kind of disappears, I felt like I was seeing some of her in Sonia Braga's character. You
Yes,
know,
yes,
that person, that precedent in her life helped give her the strength and the desire to be the person that she became, this kind of larger in life. And you know what? The rules don't apply to me. You know, and you
yeah,
know, and that's good and bad. But you know, I'm not going to go down without a fight.
yeah,
My favorite exchange in that one is the guy who comes, who's a fellow who lived in her apartment building, and he's going to take a financial killing. He's going to take a bath if
yeah,
she doesn't sign this paper. And there's probably a whole bunch of other people. So there's this interesting way, and it's kind of like Ibsen's Enemy of the People, in that yes, she's
yes,
probably right for her own self, but she's messing a bunch of other people up, not just the people who are in the corporation that own the building. But that's always been who she was. You know,
yeah. I
she's
mean, I don't know. When I mean, I have Sonia Braga. She's going to do the film, and she's such a strong. She has such a strong screen presence. She's a heroine from the word go, but she had to be also problematic.
yeah,
I thought that, you know, if she was just the perfect heroine, it wouldn't be so
yeah,
interesting. So she's selfish and sometimes arrogant, but she's wonderful. And
yeah.
in fact, she's a very strange composite of my mom. I
Huh.
lost my mother at 54. She was very young,
Wow.
and also myself and Sonia Braga. So that's the character in a few words.
Mhm. Yeah, and she's still trying to figure it out, which is interesting for a movie
Yes.
about an older person. She,
Yeah.
you know, she has her prejudices, and but when new stuff comes to her, she says, "Wow, geez, I don't know if this is going to work or not. You know, let's see what's going to happen."
Yeah.
Which is some of the reason that you have the patience for that character even when she's trying.
Yeah.
You know, and you know it's. Uh, the other thing is that you feel like the bad guys, they're just trying to do their job, some of them, and it's not a job we especially admire, but it's like, oh God, will this woman just get out of their lives so we can go on and do our job, which is to change this place around so we can make more money. That was the point of it in the first place. It's not like we're trying to change the point of this place. We didn't make it
Yeah,
for.
but they do go into some warfare kind of
Oh yes,
mode,
absolutely.
which I don't, and I know it happens to be true in many situations, and it's complicated. Yeah.
Yeah. I lived in an apartment in New York City, and the Village Voice used to every year have the 10 worst landlords in New York, and he made the list every year, our landlord,
In,
and he
in
would do
your
terrible things.
in your apartment,
Yeah, yeah, we were on the
in the
Upper
building.
West Side,
Yeah.
and this guy, you know, I mean, he stopped short at things that were violent, but he did a lot of things that were illegal to try to
Yeah.
smoke us out. Yeah.
That's the idea in the script. They would never cross the line. Like, you know, some people read the script and said, why don't they drive by with a machine gun? It's just,
Yeah.
that's not the film I want to make.
Yeah, that's not, you know, they figure they can handle it easier
Yeah.
than that.
One of the things I think is really amazing about Aquarius, you know, the movie we're talking about at this point, but I think it also resonates regularly through both of your respective bodies of work. I mean, if I were to look at a thumbnail plot synopsis for Aquarius, you know, I think, oh, I see a neatly digestible fable or allegory that's going to be delivered with a big silk bow, but by the end of the film. And yet, as you say, Kleber, it's the story is kept very open-ended in terms of, I think, not just what we as viewers take from it or make of it, but also the character within it. As John says, you know, at the end, you get the sense that none of this is quite resolved for her either. How do you both go about telling stories without resolving them to a level where that human and intellectual complexity gets lost, or perhaps ignored completely in the first place.
Yeah, well,
By the
once again,
way,
you do it at your own risk. I made a movie called Limbo, which has a very open ending. You don't know if these three people have been stranded on an island. They hear an airplane coming. You don't know if they're going to be killed by the people who land or saved by the people who land. Um, I always wanted to, have on the poster Limbo. This is a consumer warning, not just a title. But for me, the important thing was these people have formed a family and they're walking out on this beach together to face whatever it is. And they were afraid of doing that before. And the movie ends there. So many movies end, are about, oh, is the good guy going to get shot or not? And I know several actors who have been shot, thought they were dead, and then asked to come do the sequel, because they wanted them to play the bad guy again. Oh, you were only wounded. Oh, geez. Okay, I'll take the job. But people are used to neat endings. And if you don't have a neat ending, it shouldn't be just because you couldn't think of one. It's because, yes, you did have an ending, but it's not the one that everybody was expecting. Or everything doesn't resolve that neatly. This is a battle in a war. And this is, she won this battle she won when she let the termites out of the suitcase, but the war isn't over. And her life isn't over, and she's not alone. She has friends and stuff like that who she keeps at this close or this far, depending on her moods. But it's a satisfying movie in that you feel like, wow, she won a battle.
I was at the Cannes Film Festival. I was at the press screening when I saw Limbo.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the ending. People were not sure, and I thought it was, of course, a strong film. In Aquarius, it's interesting because I always thought that there are endings which explain what happened, and there are endings which I call movie endings. They seem to be satisfactory through editing and sound and drama.
Mm-hmm.
And when she opens the suitcase and she begins to chuck all those pieces of, wood with termite, and the sound and the music and her anger, I thought that was a good way of ending the film. So to this day, I get a lot of great reactions to the ending, emotional reactions even, but then there's always the group of people who don't get it. They think that I just gave up and left the film, and
Uh-huh.
that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Do you both hope that in some way your viewer will complete the film? I mean, I love the ending of Baccarat. I think maybe all films should end with Udo Kier or another character shouting, "This is only just beginning," just as the closing credits roll. But it strikes me as a viewer, any film is only just beginning by the time the closing credits roll, because you need to take it away and work out what it means to you.
By the way, I just have to say something. If I had to draw a list of top 10 endings, I would include the ending in, again, Lone Star, when they're staring at the derelict drive-in screen. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful ending.
Yeah, we had to build the drive-in. The
I
drive-ins
thought it
were
was
gone by that time. It was too bad.
That's a
But
great
yeah,
ending.
I think the audience is going to come with their own expectations and they're going to do their own work. What you want to give them is enough to hang on to. And sometimes it's going to be, well, I know some audiences are going to identify with this character. That's their way into the movie, or this character, that's their way into the movie. Sometimes they're not going to find anybody, but they're going to find those people fascinating. I'm a big fan of Akira Kurosawa. I talk to Japanese people and I'm realizing I'm only getting 2/3 of what's going on.
Yeah, me too.
I don't understand what that kimono means, or when the people speak Japanese, I don't understand what class they're from or whether they're using slang or not or whatever. But I get enough out of that film that I really like those movies. And so I feel like, you know, there's this interaction between the person and the film. And some of it's the mood they were in and what they were in the mood for that day. And some of it's the other movies they've seen and what their expectations or, you know, you certainly when you cast an actor who's mostly played one kind of role, you've got to work pretty hard. There's that Clint Eastwood film where the whole first 3/4 of the film, he's a drunk and he can't shoot straight and he's falling off his horse. And then at the end, when people are kicking him around, you say, don't you people realize that's Clint Eastwood? You don't want to treat him badly. That's Clint Eastwood. And he turns into Clint Eastwood at the ending. And not just his acting, but every film he's made before, you totally accept that he can blow everybody in the bar away. So all those things are in there and you don't know who that person is coming in. So you just try to give them things to grab onto. And you have a lot of help, which is one of the great things as opposed to novel writing. You have actors and you get an actor in a part and they don't change a line, but it's fascinating. So, oh, I didn't realize that could mean that, or that could be that heavy, or that could be that funny. And so it's one of the nice things about that interaction with an audience in a movie is sometimes you can overcome the audience's prejudice because they're not liking it. And then they realize, oh, I'm not supposed to like this guy or whatever, you know, they learn along with the film as it reveals itself.
I think you wrote Piranha, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
So you got that job with a list of requests from Corman.
Yeah, I think
it's under 90 minutes. I think it's very lean and very clear. And
yeah, those you know genre movies. The main thing that I brought to those genre movies was that the people in them could have seen a movie themselves. So when I wrote The Howling, which is a werewolf movie, those people have seen a couple horror movies. So they, you know, they know if 7 of their friends have been axe murdered in a house, don't go back into that house. You know, and so a bit of self-consciousness was needed at that time with those movies. They were very good training. I got to work with very good people. And, you know, genre movies, you know, are structurally, you kind of know what the structure is and you fill it in. But then if you can play with the audience's expectations a little and have some wiggling around of, oh, I didn't expect that. And how is he going to get out of that? It makes it more interesting for the audience. But yeah, you would have a list of you know, well, we want a big ending like Jaws where there's a bunch of people and, you know, because it was definitely a Jaws, you know, spinoff, and it had to fit within a certain budget. So you can't have too many characters and the locations have to be relatively cheap and things like that, which is a good school for filmmaking, for especially the kind of filmmaking I do where the budgets are so low. You know, I'm making movies in 4 weeks now. My next one, if I get to make another movie, will probably be 3 weeks. So you really have to write for the budget as well as for what you want to say. You know, and then you also have a lot, as I said before, you have a lot of your work done for you. People have seen Jaws or they've seen a werewolf movie, and so you can use that momentum that those movies have, and either, you know, play with their expectations.
it's strange because I never thought Piranha or The Howling were ripoffs of anything. I think Piranha is a film with its own personality. I can understand that it came, you know, from this animals running amok craze in the 70s. But it's nothing like The Last Shark, the Italian, the crazy Italian Jaws ripoff.
Right.
And I think it has its own personality.
You know,
about
it
this,
was something that Roger Corman would allow you to do. He always said, if you want to make a good movie out of this, I'm not going to get in your way, which was wonderful for those directors and writers, and in some cases actors, Just don't go over budget or time,
Mhm.
or else we'll start ripping pages out of the script. So, I wrote some very ambitious things for Roger, and then the directors would call and say, help, help, I can't afford to shoot all this. And I do another draft for them to try to get it within the time and budget they have. But then they would go off and try to make the best movie they could. And that's not always the case with exploitation movies. And they were able to get better actors, more interesting actors sometimes, because the parts were a little more complex than the usual, exploitation movie.
Yeah,
There were
The
somebody
Howling is
great.
a very fortunate experience, I think, because we have your script and then Joe Dante, who is great, and Rob Bottin.
Mhm.
And then those things together, it made a very special, strange, special film.
Yeah, it was a nice case in which the stuff that Rob Bottin did was so good that when Joe went to the producers, who were very low budget producers, and said, if I could have like $50,000 more, we could really do a better job with these special effects. They said yes, because what he'd done so far had impressed them so much. And Joe got a couple days to go and reshoot a couple things and do things well. That, because he's had other movies where they just said no, and the movie has gone into the theaters with half the special effects where the paint's still dry and they're not really what they should be. It's the people who work for Roger Corman later on realized how lucky they were, because there are people who would just, no, hire the cheapest actor, whatever, whereas if it stayed within the budget and you could pull it off, Roger was happy to have a better movie.
Could I come in at a tangent here? This doesn't follow on from what we've been immediately discussing, but I hope you'll forgive me because I wanted to ask it. Watching a selection of your respective films over the last week, another really powerful affinity that came through for me, at least as a viewer, is the way in which you use music. It's not manipulative, it's not decorative. Again, it sort of feels to me as though music is acknowledged and played and heard at length and regularly, in ways that allow us as viewers to appreciate the cultural texture of the places and communities within which your films are set. And I wonder if you could say something about that.
Yeah. For me, music. I've never done wall-to-wall music. There was there's the Hollywood kind of big orchestra thing, and in comedies, you underline every joke or pratfall with a musical note. That's just not the world that my characters exist in. It would be strange to use that kind of score for the movies that I'm making. So silence is really important. Nothing on the music track, not silence, because then you can really tell a lot of story and create a lot of mood with sounds. Neighboring sounds is a perfect example. The sounds become almost like the character of the neighborhood, and the neighborhood changes moods. And so, Ennio Morricone was great at this. Even within his musical cues, sometimes there's a silence or just a clock ticking or something like that. So and there's a kind of alchemy to it, so that when I work with Mason Daring, who's my composer, or pick background music that's already been recorded, a lot of it is just saying, what's the feeling I want here? Do I want this to underline what's happening? Do I want it to push against what's happening? In some cases, do I want it to, overpower what's happening? And you keep trying things against the picture. And then every once in a while, something lifts off. Then with the scored music, we really talk about the musical vocabulary. So in the case of Matewan, we decided we're listening to a lot of hill music, bluegrass, stuff like that, but we're taking the banjo out. Flatt and Scruggs playing in Bonnie and Clyde, that very upbeat, peppy kind of thing, was so fresh in people's minds that it had associations that we didn't want for the mood of our film. So even though ordinarily you would hear banjo in those various, pieces that we wrote for the film, we just took it out. It's like taking a color out. There's almost no red in the film. You'll see it in a scarf that one of the Italian is wearing, but we just kind of told the production designer and the costumer, go keep the red out of the movie. So once you kind of establish that idea of what's the tone of the film, what's the ethnic vocabulary of the film, then you know the world that you're listening to. But I listened to a lot of music I'd never heard before for Lone Star, and heard some great stuff. Real conjunto stuff that wasn't even that popular in Mexico, was very regional in Mexico, until I found the stuff that really went with and set a mood for what I was doing. And then Mason and I had that stuff to listen to when we were scoring the movie. So yeah, it's an important part of what you're doing. And because I edit my own films, I'm still doing it in the mix. I often joke with Mason, the composer, about the double album of cues that I dropped in the mixing room on the day. Just play that once more without any music. Okay, we're not going to use that. And I might use it in two films, hence I remember the music and say, what's that cue that we did 2 movies ago? And stick it in somewhere. But the moment plays better without any music. That we're taking it out.
Yeah, there was an interesting example in Bacurau. We wrote in the script at the opening, we would have this very kind of sci-fi American, The Thing, maybe Star Wars, Starfield, and that's how the film would always begin. And we wrote into the script the use of this wonderful track by John Carpenter from his last Lost Themes album. It's a track called Night. It's really strong, synth heavy. And when we were editing the film, we got the first draft of the special effects, and it just felt like there was no tension between the music is synth heavy and American, and then we have this idea that at least us in Brazil and the Brazilian cinema, when you open the film like that, it looks very foreign to us. Mm-hmm. It looks very, like a sci-fi Hollywood film. So I suggested we use a track from the Tropicalia movement, 1969, composed by Caetano Veloso and sung by Gal Costa. And it fit perfectly because now there was a tension, this incredibly Brazilian song with this Hollywood-like image. And then what happened is that the Carpenter track ended up in the capoeira sequence, which wasn't even in the script. I mean, the actors and the crew, the crew, they were also playing capoeira, but then we just loved them doing that. And we took the crew out and left the actors, and we decided to shoot it, and not exactly sure how we would use it in the film, or if we would use it in the film. And then at some point we thought, let's edit the capoeira sequence. It makes sense now. And then we brought the Carpenter track. And now, again, there was an incredible tension because you're in the outback in Brazil, and then this incredible synth track comes out of nowhere, and it seemed to work. And that is, it was one of those great moments in the mix, in the mixing stage, when it just sounded incredibly powerful.
I also like how, when you repeat natural sounds enough, they become part of the texture of the movie and can have some real meaning. So the dog barking in the neighborhood sounds. And then in Bacurau, those cheesy motorbikes, they're not big choppers. They're like mosquitoes, but they become so sinister because of what you associate with them. And you can hear them from far off that it's like, oh no, the mosquitoes again, somebody's coming on these bikes. There's something, each movie is its own world. And so in a 2-hour or less format, something that repeats, even if it's just a dripping faucet or something, can become very, very, very strong. Like the ticking clock in Sergio Leone or something like that. I'm in this world, and that dog he runs the night. He's part of the texture of the night. And some people can sleep and some can't because that dog's not going away.
That dog was part of my life.
Uh,
I used to live in that place and it wouldn't stop barking.
yeah. And you can
Personal
only afford
experience.
so much steak to throw over the fence to shut them up.
I didn't do that.
Yeah. We shooting in Mexico, people leave there are casas de sueño, which are, you never finish the building because you pay less taxes on it. So they've always got rebar coming up on the roof, whether it's 2 or 3 stories. When people go to work, they leave their dogs up there.
Structure. Yeah.
And the dogs, if a film crew comes to shoot on their street, we're interesting and they want to bark at us all day long. So our PAs get used to throwing meat up. So we get like 10 minutes of quiet from the dog. But it gets expensive after a while, and they get full and they're not interested in the same thing to eat.
Both, as we sort of move towards the final straight of tonight's discussion, I wondered if I could ask you a question that we're asking all our guests in various sessions this week. Obviously, as Jamie mentioned at the start, this is the Film Folk Gathering. And we would be really interested to know whether for each of you, the idea of a folk cinema or a people's cinema, or give it what label you wish, if you're willing to label it at all, that is, has any resonance with you in terms of how you see your own practice, what it is, what it means to you, why you make it?
Yeah, I think that people with movies in the United States, their taste in movies is something like their taste in clothes. It's an act not just of interest, but self-definition. And it's kind of like their taste in music. There are people who only like, salsa, or who only like rap, or who, only like old Motown. Then there are people who like a lot of different things. And that's part of what that person's interested in, but it's also part of their self-definition, and once you start to define yourself, you either leave yourself open to all kinds of movies, or you say, you know what, there's almost only so much time, there's a lot of things to do, I only like action and adventure, or I only like, fantasy, or I only like, science fiction or whatever, and you narrow your focus to the kind of movies that you want to expose it. I have friends who, if I make a movie, they say, well, is there like tension in it? They can't stand tension. So they only go to romances where they know there's no tension. That's what movies for them is like a relief from the tension of their life. So I think when you're talking about folk, it's not like it's a shared thing by everybody. Our modern media means you can pick from a lot of different rows when you go to the cafeteria, and you can be a vegetarian, or you can be somebody who eats a balanced meal, or you can only eat meat because you're on that kind of diet. So yeah, it's absolutely, it's something that's available to people. It's not too expensive, so that people can try it. But it would be really hard to say, this is what the people like. The people are so complex. The people are not simple.
Yeah, that's the big fight, the good fight. We can maybe compare access to cinema and music to the way people eat. You know, sometimes you have a meal with somebody and you realize that the person basically is only eating carbohydrates, no salads, nothing else. It's basically a yellow and white plate. As a programmer, I think that we have never had so much diversity and so much access to all kinds of cinema, all kinds of films. But still, the industry finds a way to make people choose between 2 or 3 titles. You know, if they go out on a weekend, they will go for the Fast and the Furious 9 or 10. Nothing against those films, but it is a little sad when that's all people watch, and it's almost like there is a guarantee that they will be satisfied, when in fact cinema is so diverse. So, and also I've been taking note that even colleagues and friends, they've been developing projects for streamers, or maybe they were hired to work for the streamer, and there is a very specific set of demands and requests on how it should be shot, even technically, on plot points and how the story unfolds, and this whole thing just generates the same network everywhere you go, in terms of looking at films and looking at stories. So I just hope that I keep making the films I want to make, and that they will somehow find audiences. Because I on the other side, on the other hand, I also believe that audiences, there are a lot of people who are eager to discover something that is at least a little different or a little stranger, to be surprised, you know. And yeah, and now with the pandemic, I'm not sure what's happening. I don't know what's going to happen. I hope everybody will eventually go back to the cinema, but it's still a little early to understand exactly what the impact of the pandemic will be. We have all been taught over the last year to a lot more than it used to be, to enjoy films at home. Even myself, last year I actually had a fun night with Emily, my partner. We were in lockdown, and we put something on and had a nice meal and watched Spike Lee's The Five Bloods, which was coming out in the planet that same day. So maybe that's one new way, but it's a strange moment.
Yeah, the other thing that I'm somewhat aware of is younger, especially American audiences who mostly watch TV, having a shorter attention span. That if the cutting isn't fast enough, if there's not enough stimulus, they tend to get nervous. It's like, is this going to take like longer than, and they're on their cell phones and stuff like that. And so it's not just for watching movies, it's for life as well. And they're used to multitasking. So the idea of just watching a movie and not reading, a scroll at the same time seems like punishment.
And don't forget, I think now it's possible to watch a film in 2/3 of the time, or maybe half the time.
Yeah.
With the
you speed up.
The speed up thing.
Yeah,
it was great. Yeah.
Well, maybe if I can try the final question another way, I mean, I'm really struck that you both raised culinary metaphors. And I suppose what I think I'm hearing you both talk about is the difference between an industrially processed, deep frozen cinema and something that you both are invested in making, which is more organic, which is more authentic, which involves working more with resources that are immediately to hand, and doesn't include any mood altering e-numbers and other sorts of artificial preservatives.
Mhm.
Is that kind of cinema still important to make today?
Once again, you have to almost, if you take it out of a business context, a movie can be important to somebody, can change the way they think about things and even think about themselves. So that's an important thing that you made for that person. If you put it in an industrial context, and if it doesn't make its money back, how could it be a good film? If a lot of people see it, but after the point where they would have had to pay for it, is it still a bad film, even though it got a lot of likes later on, but they didn't pay to see it? When you judge something like that, it's such a personal thing.
Mhm.
So I'd like to make some more movies. I don't think I'm going to get to, but and the world's not going to end if I don't. But I think it's important, just as far as the public conversation goes, that there's not only industrial films that are meant to satisfy expectations that people already have and have kind of been trained to have. There's good, I see commercial films all the time that may have some really, really good work in them and may be interesting. It's rare. It's kind of, I can usually know what the next line is going to be and what the next scene is going to be and what the ending is going to be like. But every once in a while, there's something that surprises me that's a commercially made film, and those are wonderful. But I do think it's important, whether it's me or anybody else, that somebody is making those movies and they're somehow getting to people, because they just raise questions. They make people look at the world in a different way, and not a way that you can go to the theater, watch 2 hours or more of movie, and then forget what you saw 15 minutes later. What was that Fast and Furious or the other Fast and Furious?
I know, was it Fast and Furious or Furious and Fast?
Yeah.
Kleber.
Well, yeah, I mean, in Brazil, of course, I often find myself in discussions and talking to people, and there is often the image of the big bad monster of Hollywood, of course, pushing itself into Brazilian cinemas and taking, which, by the way, happens to be true. But I have to say that the whole conversation about us making our personal films and then making the super commercial films, it doesn't always work, because I grew up watching a lot of big Hollywood films. I remember when I went to see the first Die Hard. I love it. I loved it then, and I still love it now. I think it's the kind of film that only Hollywood would be able to make, and the way it made. And I think it's a pretty good film. Jackie Brown, I think, was a film made within the system, and I think it's a brilliant film. I'm always optimistic in terms of watching films coming out of nowhere. And I think we can always expect to see great films from Netflix, from a Filipino filmmaker, from Chile, Australia. That's always the way it's been. And as a film critic, I have seen all kinds of films, and I remember being moved and impacted by watching all kinds of films. But that's the problem. You have to open yourself up. I was in Cannes in 2002 when Elia Suleiman showed his Divine Intervention, which I happen to think is a masterpiece. It came out of nowhere because I didn't know him up until then. It was in competition and it blew me away, almost literally. So, yeah, the industry does have, I mean, it creates a lot of problems for people like us, but at the same time, we also feed on it in a way.
I do think,
aesthetically.
Talking with Kleber before about state support of movies. Mexico, those funds have been cut down. Brazil are kind of sitting on projects. Other countries have their ups and downs. I do think that it's important for countries, maybe not necessarily the United States, where there really is kind of a business and it would be such a political shit fight if they ever started, the government supporting filmmakers about who would get the money and how much. But I think it's important for countries to encourage their own culture. Even if it's to have their own detective shows, which, many European countries are making great detective shows now. Brazil and Mexico and a bunch of other, countries in Latin America have wonderful detective writers. That's a genre, but there's good work to be done in that genre. But when the screens are monopolized by American companies, it's really hard to make your money back. And so I think it's important for those countries to just realize, just for as I said, the public conversation, for people to talk about who are we now, who were we then. It's important for those countries to keep supporting their cinema in some way.
I think France is a very interesting example of a country which not only supports cinema, but it supports film going and the discussion around cinema. It's quite unlike, I mean, there is a very strong film culture in the UK. Portugal, I think, has incredible filmmakers and cinephiles, but France is truly it's a very interesting case.
Well, one thing I remember, we went to a film festival in Amiens, and on the weekend they showed movies for kids. And they explained that these kids have been watching movies since they hit the age of reason. That there's a little bus that goes around that goes to schools, and you sit in the bus and you watch a movie, and you talk about the movie afterwards. And so one of the things that they've done there that's great is develop an audience, and develop a fairly sophisticated audience. So by the time a French kid is 15, they've probably seen a foreign movie that wasn't an American movie. They've probably seen something dubbed or subtitled.
I remember, John, when I went to the US with Neighboring Sounds, and the film was actually the Brazilian pick for the foreign language, Academy Awards. And I was interviewed by one of the journalists for the Golden Globes, and she asked me, and she was not American. She asked me what it felt like to make a foreign language film. And I said, it's actually not a foreign. I mean, English is my foreign language. So I'm not making a foreign language film. I'll never forget that. Crazy.
Well, listen, both. It's a great note to end on, because I'm afraid we have run out of time. Just on behalf of Jamie and also the audience, I'd like to say a big thank you to you both for your amazing bodies of work, but also for being so generous with your time tonight. It's been amazing to speak to you both, but also equally amazing to hear you both speak with each other. So thank you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks everybody for listening. And
Thank you very
I'll
much.
see you in Bordeaux, maybe.
Yes, we will. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.